a study day bit?
There will be a test at the end. It's going to be particularly testing with him in the room. So today is a press/study day. Some really important info to go over firstly. Toilets are downstairs. So if an alarm does sound, please make your way out towards the car park. I believe that's where the muster point is. Phones on silent, please. Really importantly, as part of the day, we're going to explore the site a little bit. Do not touch any tools or equipment. As you can guess, there are a number of helicopters here. I always like doing this because there are some new faces amongst us. But if I could just ask you really quickly stand up who you are, and if you're a YouTuber or a magazine, what your channel or magazine is called, and then we just flick through everyone, if that's okay. So Matt, can I ask you to start off, please?
I'm Phil, Flory Models. Yeah, you probably know it. I'm Alex Mann of Mann's Model Moments, YouTube channel, and shortly to be a model shop in Wincanton.
You know who I am, so I'm Dale, head of brand for Airfix. Luke, who are you? I'm Luke. Researcher for Airfix.
I'm Chris, one of the designers at Airfix.
I'm Martin, I'm Airfix development manager.
Hi, I'm Brooke, I'm marketing manager for Airfix.
Hello, I'm James and I'm assistant Martin.
Yeah.
Hi there. Maverick.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Well, it's not secret really, is it? I can't really talk about the agenda just yet. But essentially, we're going to go through the research and development of something that I can't talk about. We've got a talk from Historic Helicopters and all the amazing things that they do here. We will stop for lunch. Lunch will be downstairs. I will scale the time of lunch depending on how well.
So you don't get to the end and go, this scheme is fabulous, but we don't have the parts for it, so we can't do it. And then, hopefully, the model's near the end of that point. But there's various bits we have to do. So talking to the decal designer, doing multiple revisions on the decal sometimes. The artwork, speaking to Adam Tooby, doing multiple revisions on that. And then things like this, where you're launching the product, which is probably the most rewarding time because we've had to keep it secret for so long and worry about saying CP too many times. And eventually it's released. So here we are now, at the end of this timescale. So hopefully that's the end of the repeat slides for people who have seen this presentation before. So we were lucky enough to get a lovely manual from Westland of the HS1, so the very first CP. They'd had a go at making their own Airfix kit, but it wasn't quite there, as you can see, so we thought we'd tweak their manual a bit. And this is part of that data collection slide, you see. So we're going out and collecting as much information as we can, and obviously where better to get it than the horse's mouth. See what I did there? Pun intended, where we are. So getting it from the original manuals, people who flew the aircraft, but also going out and visiting the aircraft as well. So you see some interesting cutaways here. The child in me here has shown the P-tube that is fitted, and we've had plenty of what my other half would call very boring conversations, what me, Chris and Martin think are very interesting conversations on the complexities of the rotor. And also the various different parts that change depending on what mark you're doing. So you see the fuel here. That changes depending on Navy to HR3s, HC4s, various things like that. So that's perfect. And then I love this because it shows just how far we went with this. So we did something a bit different with this project where it's one of my first as Airfix researcher, although two and a bit years ago now. We'd already had a scan of a HC4 from HMS Sultan, but we were missing some data. So we decided we were going to scan some more aircraft to try and fill some gaps. We ended up scanning 6 of them, just because we could, which is great. Can be a bit confusing at times, making sure you're using the right scan. But we ended up travelling to 6 different destinations, scanning 6 aircraft. We used 10 different organisations for the research of this kit, one of which we're here today, but various others as well. So they're all we're very much grateful for that. 12 months of research. So we actually sort of relate this to a 24 scale kit in terms of the difficulty of research and design. 348 parts, as you saw earlier. The Spitfire's 433, so there's not a lot of difference in terms of parts. And I'm sure we've all got a few grey hairs as a result. And it was a great thing to do, to add up just how many aircraft we visited. In the end, it was over 35. I mean, for Gannets, you can't do things like that, where we visited about 4, because that's all there are in the UK. Sea Kings are everywhere, and it's probably the best time to research something like this. Obviously, Spitfires, dime a dozen, not very original. Sea Kings have only really just left service in the grand scheme of things, so there are plenty around that haven't been touched since then, which means that you can visit lots of different ones and see the changes that took place. And just because I claim it was 2,000 miles travelled, so it was a lot of hours in the car for this one. You'll see different icons on this map behind. I know it's a bit difficult. Those in blue are Navy Sea Kings, those in yellow are RAF, and those in green are HC4s that we visited. You can see the one up near Doncaster, that's the South Yorkshire Air Museum, with their HS6, were very helpful. I didn't have to travel to that one. I don't like going too far past Cambridge, really. But yeah, as you can see, it's quite distributed, but generally there are a lot of helicopters down this way. It's almost as if they were made nearby and they've come home to roost. So we've got the ones here, we've got them at Sultan, we've also got them at Yeovilton and various places like that. So one place I didn't mention there was heli operations. So down at Portland, the old Portland, there is still a Sea King flying, XV666, the longest continuously serving Sea King. And it's got this fabulous paint scheme. As I say, maybe Trigger's crew. It's training. It used to train German search and rescue crews, and now it trains other nations. And it was one of our first trips on the way down here, I believe. We visited Portland to see the actual aircraft. We thought it quite important to go see one that was operational in the HE5 role before heading here. And that gives you a lot of information, not just in terms of external finishes like the rivets you can see near the serial, but also internal information. It's also trying to speak to those that work on it. You gain so much information through speaking to people. And again, that's why Sea King is a great thing to research, because it's only recently retired. There's a lot of living memory around the aircraft, which makes my job easier sometimes. Sometimes it makes it harder, but not in this case. It's very, very nice. It's not all looking at helicopters. Well, it is, but you then get to have a bit of fun with it, sitting in various helicopters. When we arrived here, I believe the engineering team had been struck down with COVID. We obviously wanted to reflect its original, where it was upgraded, particularly the monitor on the right-hand side and some other bits. So it was useful for getting crew positions, but it wasn't fantastic for showing the original equipment that was in there. And for that we had to sort of get a bit creative. You'll see on the table behind when we go there, there's a nice cutout from a Westland advert showing the equipment. But they also stole the equipment from the Wessex. So there's a very nice one at Western Supermare, still fitted with the dipping sonar that drops out the bottom of the Sea King. So we use that as a reference, and the HS6. And also, lovely period photos where we can find them, but they were really hard to come by. I'm sorry, you probably can't see much of that right head because it's quite light. But as I say, one of the big things that we were fascinated by was this rotor head and how complex it was, especially when you consider the blade fold, and trying to render it accurately at scale, as Chris will tell you later, is a bit of a nightmare. And also, very simplistically, they're very high up, so trying to get decent photos of them can be hard. Luckily, when we went to Salton down in Gosport, they had a training device, essentially, at the top of a rotor head, which meant that we could look at it in a bit more detail. Also, internally in the seeking. Critiques, as I say, my favourite bit, Chris's least favourite bit. It's a lot of stuff like this where you're taking photos of aircraft, circling bits and going, where's this bit? Why haven't you got this? And every designer does it. You get so close to a subject that it's, you can't see what's in front of you almost in terms of the detail. They're fantastic at designing the shape and the detail, but there's just so much on the Sea King, so you need that fresh set of eyes to come back in and identify bits that have changed or need changing. So a lot of that is, I hate rivet counters, can I just put it out there? Well, I am one. The job has forced me to become one. So it's things like, you've missed a rivet here, you've missed a row of rivets. Especially on Sea Kings.
Yeah, so there'll be a little bit of repetition, as we said, because the process isn't that dissimilar for every kit, but I'm going to focus on some different things that were part of the Sea King particularly, so hopefully there'll be some new stuff. As Luke said, we started off with the scan that we used in the 72nd scale model, which it was interesting for me to come back to because I got to design the 72nd scale a couple of years into getting the job. So they're both my little babies. It was kind of nice to come back to it. Probably healthy to have a break in between. I wasn't entirely sick of helicopters, but it was kind of fun to come back and see it again in so much more detail. So I went back to this old scan and my old data and I got to critique what I did 8 years ago. He is now doing the scans himself and getting these interior scans is a first. I've never worked on a project with information like that before. And it was amazing to be able to, I think I did a relatively good job without them. But putting it in, you'd be like, oh, I got that right. Oh, I need to nudge that by 0.2 of a millimetre, and now it's exactly right. It's kind of those extra level of confidence that I managed to get because of these interior scans that he was bringing. So like the other projects, for this one we started, take the scan, but that CAD data, I think there's a couple of people here who use CAD, know about creative design, yeah? There's a few people who kind of know that, maybe some who don't. The kind of data you get from a scan is not useful for then tooling something from. It's like a cloud point, so you get loads and loads of little points and it's triangulated those shapes, and it's really rough and messy, and if you try to make some plastic parts out of that, it'd be rubbish. So we have to totally recreate the data. But it was underneath the sort of cowlings taking up the engine, or taking up the gearbox rather. I needed to imagine what the continuous shape was, so there's some little playing around still to build up these 3D shapes that I want. And eventually you end up something like here, you kind of get this modelling effect where the kind of the perfect nature of the CAD and the real life nature of an aircraft that's flown a lot are the same. And we've got to try and inspect every little detail of it. So right now you need to move that, twist it a little bit, take off 2.2 mil or something. It's a long process, but hopefully it is all worthwhile at the end. And here are just some built-up test shots, seeing some of that interior detail. This is one of the things I enjoy with this kit, and hopefully you'll enjoy building it, is all the interior parts. There aren't many subjects we get to do that have such a large space inside and filled with different bits of hardware, and they just build up as all these little sub-assemblies. And it kind of looks lovely, these little things you built up on your desk, and you can paint each one individually, almost like don't want to put them in and hide them. And so for the winch assembly for the dipping sonar is one of those little things that's really fun little mini model to get to build inside the main model. Really enjoyed that. It was one of the first things I put together when we got the 3D print. It's actually more exciting than the rest of it. I don't know what it is, but this is really fun. I made a little winch. It's cool. So yeah, but it's hard to see once it's built up, but hopefully when you get to do it, you'll enjoy that. And even if you don't do a mark with that in, you can still build it on its own separately anyway, just because it's fun. Well, I think it's fun, you might not. And finish it with some glamour shots of it rendered up. So it might be easy to see on the screen later. just filled with detail. Every panel, every instrument, TVs, what will look like TV scripts. The cockpit was just so many little dials and knobs to do. But thankfully, they had a loop to tell me what was the right things to do for which mark. That's the challenge I have, is like forget which one I'm supposed to be doing and find a picture. Like, oh, it looks like that now. Like, that's not the right one, Chris. Put it away. But I'm very grateful to have them around. So we have a bunch out on the tables at the back. Luke's just going to go through why we chose the schemes that we did. But you'll be able to go and have a look at all the parts very soon. So if I hand back over to Luke.
Jonathan Mock, in this case, was doing the seekings. And it's a lot of dialogue, especially where you've got so many aerials changing across the 4 layouts. You know, we've been dealing with it for a year and a half at this point. Jonathan's given it one day and you're going, right, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And it's a lot to get your head around. And I'm sure when you start looking at the models, you just realise how many things change across the various schemes. There was a lot of digging into those photos from Farnborough and sort of using other photos of HS1s to fill any gaps that were apparent. You're always conscious that if you're using another airframe to fill gaps onto the scheme you're using, that it might not be correct. So there's a lot of digging that goes into that. And you're trying to pick the right time period as well. Even though it's HS1, and they weren't around for decades, they were only around for sort of 5-6 years before they became HS2s and onwards. You want to make sure you're picking one from the same squadron at the same time period, so you can be as accurate as possible. And I think within the team we were really keen to get this navy colour, as we call it, rather than the HU5 to see the grey and red, which are fantastic, but it really does tell the story going from this older sort of thing. We've seen them on the deck of Ark Royal, for example, through to what we've seen them in the skies today. So Scheme 2, Shock Horror, XV666. Damien, as it's also called, I don't think I've said that. The Antichrist, obviously. Which is just a fantastic thing. And the B scheme is really intriguing, and it's been a real struggle actually. There's one photo of it, we believe at Portland, without its winch fitted. So you'll see in the instructions we've told people not to fit the winch. So it's probably just come out of repaint, possibly. And the problem with telling the difference between HCS5, which is helicopter anti-submarine, and HU5, the utility role, air rescue as you may call it, is that you can't tell what's inside unless you get a video walk around. There were certain telltale signs, so if it had what was called the SAR step, so this little step, a bit like HC4s have a big step by the cargo door, this had a small one. This one did have that little step, so we believe it might have been a HC5 or just in the beginnings of the conversion. But again, we can't tell what was inside. So we labelled this a HS5. We also had the dilemma that we have all the parts for this HS5 internally. We need to show the model how to build it. So we put a little note on there saying, we weren't sure, hopefully you guys are, but also showing we've built it as a HS5 inside